My name is Dana Howerton. I'm 34 years old, I think, yeah, and also known as Todd's wife. Um, I was born in Greensboro, North Carolina, and my parents were married when I was born, but they were divorced shortly thereafter, I believe when I was 2 years old, so I didn't really have both my parents in the home growing up. Um, Mostly lived with my mom and visited my dad on the weekends and vacations and such, but so never knew what that was like to have both parents in the home. Would have liked to have known what that was like. It leaves a void in your life when you don't have your dad. It's a hard void to fill. But nonetheless, I grew up and I thought I had a pretty good life, all things considered. I don't remember a whole lot about when I was a teenager. I remember loving high school and being pretty popular and playing basketball. And I played basketball hoping that my dad might someday come see me play basketball. Ended up being pretty good. I was very coachable. Wasn't necessarily good, just coachable and tall. This was my senior year in high school. I got my first boyfriend. I remember going to prom. I remember everything being really, really what it was supposed to be. First love. Thought we were going to get married, live happily ever after. My 18th birthday, I gave myself away to him. And not long after that, I found out I had a basketball scholarship to Guilford College. I was going to be going to college, and we were in a what I considered a serious relationship. But shortly after that, I found out. After I found out I was going to college at Guilford, I found out I was pregnant, and that in no way fit into my plans. And I knew that would not fit into his plans. So we decided to have an abortion. Both parties, we decided to have an abortion, and I remember thinking, this is not that big of a deal. It's not going to be a big deal. I'm going to get through this. I'm not going to think about this anymore. I'm just going to move on. I've got a life ahead of me. I don't have time for a baby. I don't know how to be a mom. I'm too young. But the day that we went for the abortion, he was with me. I just remember being very sick and tired, and they did give you pain medicine, and kind of out of it for a couple of days. And once I was done being out of it from pain medicine, I just realized that I'd taken somebody's life, and it just kind of sank in. So I went to college. I was in this boy. It was an on again, off again relationship. We were not in a committed relationship. It was actually suspended, and I decided rather than go back to Guilford College, if I couldn't play ball there, and lost my scholarship, I couldn't afford it. And I went to UNCG and Guilford College, and just kind of bounced from college to college, all the while in and out of this relationship with this guy, and just not feeling really good about myself. When I was at UNCG, I found out I was pregnant again. And at this point, I knew I did not want to have an abortion. I also knew that he had no intentions of us being a family or being married and being together. So I decided I was going to have the baby by myself and be a single mom. My mom did it. It worked out okay. I have a beautiful daughter as a result of that, Madison. And she just became my everything. I poured my whole life into her. I continued in school for a little bit playing at it, and just decided I needed to get a job, be a mom, get on with my life. And I got a full-time job, and I was making really good money. For me, really good money. Got an office job, and she was in daycare, and I thought everything was just as it was going to be. I was self-sufficient, and she was all that I needed in life. I so very much look forward to every day coming home to her. And her smile, she just got me through each and every day. She was my reason. And when she was about a year old, some friends of ours were down at the bar down the street from our house at UNCG drinking. So I went down there to meet them. And I had a few drinks one night, and or that night, and my friends wanted to stay longer than I did. And I don't remember exactly where Madison was. She was probably with my mom that night. But I decided I was going to go on home. I was very comfortable in this neighborhood. I had worked at the grocery store right beside the bar and walked home many nights, midnight after closing by myself. It was just home. That was my hood. And I walked home one night and somebody called my name from one of the houses on the way home. And because they called my name, I just assumed I knew them. And I walked over to them, and I didn't know them. And there were two guys, and they raped me. And I went home that night, and I took a shower. And again, I resolved myself that it never happened. I would never think about it. I would never tell anybody. I would never acknowledge it. And I would get on with my life, and it would be fine. And it wasn't too long into it that I figured out that I was probably pregnant again. And at this point, I knew I did not want to have an abortion. I knew that not because I was better than that, but because there was a lot of guilt and shame that came along with Madison. Like, why was she better than that first baby? And I didn't want to deal with that ever again. My motivation for not having an abortion was selfish in itself. But I hated that baby inside of me. And I hated it because it reminded me of something that I resolved myself to never, ever, ever think about again. So I'd never actually acknowledged that baby. I never told anybody. I carried the baby for 9 months. I never went to the doctor. I continued living the way I was. I continued drinking. I am sure I did other things that I should not have been doing. I knew that I was pregnant. I knew that this had happened. I knew that this baby was there, but in this reality that I created for myself and I walked in every day, none of that had happened and there was no baby. And that was what I moved in, was that false reality that I created for myself. And my body followed suit. I didn't gain weight. No one knew I was pregnant. It was crazy. And this night that my mom was here, again, I convinced myself that I was just having cramps, and I took a couple of Demerol. And I remember waking up and knowing I was in full-blown labor. And I went to the bathroom, and I had no idea what my plan was. And I have no idea what would have happened had my mom not happened to be coming back that night. But I had a baby in my bathroom. She was born in the toilet. I remember when I scooped her up, having this overwhelming love for her right away. She was all of a sudden very real to me. And all the hatred I had towards her, and all the times that I prayed to a God I didn't know that He would just take her. I just loved her so much in that moment, and I held her so tightly. And my mom walked in the door a few minutes later, and that was God. I know it was God because my mom just went into action mode, and she called 911. I remember the firemen were there, and everybody was just stunned. Nobody knew what to do. This doesn't happen. And it was a miracle that I lived. It was an even greater miracle that the baby lived. She was fine. When we got to the hospital, she was fine. And I wanted so badly to keep her. I remember laying in the hospital and holding her and holding Madison and thinking, what if I can't love her the same way I love Madison? Because it would certainly be different. So we decided to give her up for adoption. My mom and I decided that together. And so I asked the social worker, can we just make sure she goes? I don't care if they're Christian. I just don't want her to go to one of those houses where they make her go to church every time the doors are open. It's so funny now to think about that. And the social worker very boldly asked me why not. And I said, well, I just want her to be her own person. I just want her to discover who she is. And I got to be a part of the interview process. And we settled on a couple. And the mom was white. And the dad was Native American. So she would be with parents that were like her real parents. He was a pastor. And to know that now that she grew up in a home where her father was a pastor, it's such a gift from God. Because I know they will help her find her true identity. Finally picked up with my friends, started going to church with a friend of mine. found out that another friend of mine was reaching out to me, that we had lost touch, and she and I started hanging out, and I went to her church for the first time. And I remember that night, she introduced me to her pastor before the message, and I had this idea about pastors. They were way up here. I've since learned that's not the case. He was the sweetest man. I remember him shaking my hand and looking at Madison and then looking back at me and saying, "Is this your only child?" And not growing up in church, not knowing much about church, I just thought he knew everything about me. That the Lord had just spoken to him, and he knew all of my history and all of my junk, and he knew about the baby, he knew about everything. And as I was sitting in that message, of course, it was one of those moments where he was speaking straight to me, and since he knew everything about me, it just made sense that he had directed his entire message towards me and my life. And I gave my life to the Lord that night. I guess about 2 years later, I had another job at a new place, and there was this really, really cute guy there, and I'd been watching him from a distance, and one day he noticed me, and it was like fireworks. And that guy today is my husband. But met Todd at American Express, and I knew he was a Christian. He told me he was a Christian and a Republican. I think those were the first two things that he had expressed about himself. we can edit that. We started dating. It was very whirlwind relationship. I very much fell in love with him very quickly, and October of 2003 we were married, and in November, a month after we were married, Todd was going to try out for Nashville Star in Charlotte, and I was really excited for him. We bought him a cowboy hat and tight jeans, a plaid shirt, and I sent him on his way down to Charlotte, and was really excited. And that night, I knew it was going to be a long audition, but that night I never heard from him. I was waiting on the phone call. I was really anxious to hear how things were going. About 9 o'clock, I hadn't heard from him, and I kept calling and didn't get an answer. So I assumed everything was going really well. He was just really busy. But about midnight, when I didn't hear from him, I was beginning to get worried. He had driven to Charlotte, so I figured maybe he had gotten in a wreck. Maybe something really bad had happened. So I just started thinking the worst. It wasn't until 3 days later that I got a call from him finally. And he said he was going to be staying at a friend's house for a couple days, and she's like, "What's going on?" And I did not know about cocaine or crack, and he explained that to me that night, or that day when I found him, and he apologized to me, and he said, "I want to be a family. I want us to work, and I don't want to do this. I want to be your husband. I want to be our son's father." And I said, "Okay, let's do this." And he promised it would never happen again, and of course I believed him. Hunter was born, I think, a Saturday, and Easter Sunday was the following day. And he was the best husband during labor. He was holding my hand and rubbing my hair. And he was awesome. And I just remember thinking, he is going to be such a good father. We're going to be a real family. My daughter was there, and it was just such a beautiful picture of what I never knew a family to be whole. The most beautiful picture to me was Todd holding our son for the very first time, and I just knew that we weren't going to have to worry about drinking and drugs anymore. That part of our lives was gone. He had all this to live for, and all this was in front of him, and I never thought he would go back to that. And he got a really good job shortly thereafter, and I actually got to quit my job. I thought I had everything that I wanted. I had a husband who loved me and worked hard to provide for me. I got to stay at home with our kids. And that was, in my mind, what I thought were the true desires of my heart. And about 9 months into Todd working there, he disappeared again. That was one of his worst falls. One night when he was out, he would stay gone for a week, and he came home one night after being gone for a couple of days, and I knew when he came home it was just either to steal something to pawn, grab a bite to eat, or just rest his head for a minute. As soon as he walked in, I went outside, out back, and took the keys and pretended like I was leaving. And so he wouldn't leave. I knew he would stay there with Hunter, and he did. He wouldn't leave, but he was walking around. I could see him from the back. We had big open window, and I left the curtains and the blinds open so I could see him walking around in there, and he was restless, and I was just praying, God, please just let him fall out, let him fall asleep. I don't want to worry about him one more night. So finally I saw him sit down and slump over, and I thought he'd fallen asleep, and I walked back in the house. The minute he heard the door open, he grabbed his keys and he took off through the front door, and I literally chased him through the front door and begged him to stay. And he got in the car, and I grabbed a hold of his mirror, and he started the car, and he threw it into reverse, and with me holding on to the mirror, took off, and the mirror fell off. I fell on the road, and he would just as soon run over me. That night, after Todd left, I just prayed. I said, God, you've got to show me something. You've got to give me something. I am sick of this. I'm sick of being in this marriage. I'm sick of this man in my life. I'm sick of being rejected and deserted, and I just remember opening God's Word or grabbing God's Word and saying, if you don't show me something, if you don't reveal yourself to me, I'm not going to believe you are who you say you are. I'm not going to believe you are who you claim to be anymore. And if I don't believe that, I don't have to stay in this marriage anymore. And I opened God's Word, and I said, God, I don't know what you have. I'm just going to open it. If you don't speak to me, then I'm going to quit you. I'm going to quit this marriage. I'm going to quit. And I opened to Isaiah 54:4. And I just opened to Isaiah 54, and I started reading at 4. And the first word is, do not be afraid, because you will not be ashamed. Do not be embarrassed, because you will not be disgraced. You will forget the shame of your youth, and you will not remember the shame you felt when you lost your husband. The God who made you is your husband. His name is the Lord Almighty. The Holy One of Israel is the one who saves you. He's called the God of all the earth. And you are like a woman whose husband left her, and you are very sad. You are like a wife who married young, and then her husband left her. But the Lord called you to be His, says your God. That night I understood that even though I had received the gift of salvation, I had never truly committed my life to the Lord, and I'd never given Him lordship of my life. I always had somebody else in that place that only He was designed to be, or I was designed for Him to be. He was to be Lord of my life. He was to be my husband. He was to be my everything. So even though I accepted the gift of salvation, that night in my house, being rejected again, God came to me in such a sweet way. He said, won't you let me be your everything? Won't you find everything in me? And I committed myself that night to look to Him first. And it didn't make everything okay right away, but I understood His position, and that put everything else in the right perspective. You don't just lose guilt and shame overnight, but when God tells you, you will not remember the shame that you felt when you were young. When God tells you that, He delivers. And this past March, on my daughter's birthday, I felt guilty for not feeling guilty. And I remember thinking, God, it's not fair. I shouldn't be able to move in this life and have all these things, these good things come to me when I've done so much. And it's not good. And God promised me that I would not remember the shame of my youth. And I need to stand on that. I don't have to remind myself of how horrible I was and the bad decisions that I made, God doesn't see me that way. I guess in my experience with how God has helped me overcome that guilt and shame is He reminded me that there is no experience in this world that we would have that He didn't. That was so hard for me as a woman to understand how a man could ever feel what it's like to be exposed in that way. He showed me that He was very much exposed on the cross. His masculinity was exposed. His sexuality was exposed. He was not immune to that feeling. And because He can relate to me in that humiliation, I can then relate to Him in His glory and in His victory and all the good that comes with that, and knowing that He sees me in a totally different way than how I've seen myself so long. There's just no room for guilt and shame. There's just no room. And I don't have time to maintain these regrets when I think about the way that He loves me. And that's it. He just loves us so much. Most recently, when Todd was asked to be a pastor, I had a real fear that people would... I know what Todd has done. Most people know Todd's testimony and they know what God has done in his life. And but as a woman, I think we're held to a higher standard. We're supposed to be pure and we're supposed to be clean. And I was neither of those things. And I know what God has done in my life, but I also know how I would have looked at women in the position of pastor's wife. So I had a real issue with that. And God very sweetly, as He always does, reminded me of something someone had spoken to me or I'd heard before, but He told me that He doesn't create positions for people. He creates people and He positions them. And I believe with all my heart that my husband and I were created for each other. And there's no doubt that my husband was meant to be a pastor. He's done that. He's always done that. And if that's the case, if I truly believe that, then I'm very much meant to be a pastor's wife.